Let's talk about apparent hitboxes. An apparent hitbox is basically the cumulative size of the hitbox created by the superposition of active frames. This could be a projectile or a character in motion. Consider how a projectile controls the space it passes through. The same could be said about a character moving with a hitbox. The first element of an apparent hitbox is moving your character with an active hitbox. Characters sliding across the ground can create apparent hitboxes by dragging hitboxes with them as they move. Take, for example, Luigi and his up tilt. Despite having only decent range, it has a massive apparent hitbox that stretches across the stage when Luigi performs this move out of a wave dash. Apparent hitboxes can also be created using aerials while moving with an active hitbox. This motion could include drifting, jumping, or falling. It doesn't really matter as long as the hitbox is dragged to create an even larger apparent hitbox. While in the air, your character can travel horizontally or vertically, making apparent hitboxes in the air more adjustable than grounded ones. Every character is capable of making apparent hitboxes in the air. There are many parameters unique to each character that influence the utility of their apparent hitboxes. The second element of an apparent hitbox is understanding how your hitbox is moving relative to your character's body. By combining your character's motion and the motion of your hitbox relative to your character, you can create an even larger apparent hitbox. So what do I mean by that? Consider Ice Climber's down smash. The hitbox begins behind their back and then swings forward. Notice how the move extends in the same direction that ices are traveling in when they wave dash forward. The hitbox from your character's motion and the motion of the hitbox relative to your character sum together to create an even larger apparent hitbox. You can use these larger apparent hitboxes economically to threaten more of the stage when attacking. If Ice Climbers did the same down smash but facing the other direction, their motion and the motion of their hitbox relative to them would counteract each other, making the apparent hitbox smaller. I want to clarify that bigger apparent hitboxes aren't always better. There are a ton of reasons why someone would want to move with a hitbox in retrograde motion. They tend to make for great defensive options, and in some cases they come out faster. Every situation is different. Consider Captain Falcon's up air. This is a move that starts in front, swings up and above, and then ends behind him. Thus, if Falcon jumped forward with an up air, the motion of his body and his hitbox would detract from each other. My point isn't that Falcon players shouldn't do approaching up airs facing forward, because it's really good. It's more of a point that the apparent hitbox would be even bigger if Falcon did a front flip instead of a back flip. Falcon is a special case though, because he can carry his run speed into the air with him to move forward much faster than he could backwards. This is why apparent hitboxes should be considered on a case-by-case basis. The third and final element of an apparent hitbox is the duration of active frames. I mentioned in the definition of an apparent hitbox the aspect of a hitbox moving in time. That's because hitboxes that are active for a longer duration can make larger apparent hitboxes. The product of the size, speed, and duration of the hitbox creates the approximate area of effect of an apparent hitbox. Some moves are known as having lingering hitboxes, while other moves have hitboxes that flash in and out of activity. A move like Fox's Shine would be a flashing hitbox, and Fox's Nair would be a lingering hitbox. Fox's Nair and Shine are easy to classify, while some moves don't really fit either definition. A move like Falcon's up air can be harder to pinpoint since it is out for quite a few frames without being static. Flashing hitboxes tend to not make apparent hitboxes that are much larger than the hitbox of the move, whereas lingering hitboxes tend to make very large apparent hitboxes. Thinking about apparent hitboxes is interesting to me because I realize some characters like Fox and Falco, who are not known for their range, have surprisingly large apparent hitboxes. Comparing this to a character like Marth, who has enormous hitboxes but can't create apparent hitboxes that are much larger than the initial hitbox because his attacks don't have very many active frames. Every character is going to use apparent hitboxes differently. A character like Sheik, who is known to have slow drift in the air, is better suited for making vertical apparent hitboxes, whereas a character like Jigglypuff can abuse her drift to make all sorts of contorted shapes with apparent hitboxes. So to summarize, the purpose of this video is to define and talk about apparent hitboxes and some of the useful properties that arise from them. There are three elements to consider in order to maximize the size of apparent hitboxes: the speed and motion of your character, the hitbox motion relative to your character, and the duration of active frames of the hitbox. Moving in the direction of your hitbox travels relative to your character's body will create the largest apparent hitbox. So hopefully there's a lot to think about in terms of your character. While you use this information to make smarter decisions, apparent hitboxes are only one of many factors that determine a move's viability in competitive Melee. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video or learned something, remember to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on more content for Bruce.